Welcome. My name is Jerry Johnson, President of National Religious Broadcasters, and NRB is an association of Christian broadcasters, thousands of members that broadcast to millions of listeners and viewers every week. In fact, over 60 million people listen or watch National Religious Broadcast every week. And it is my privilege today to introduce Tony Perkins, President of the Family Research Council, to give the results and his reaction to an incredible bit of research that we've done in partnership on the issue of marriage. Tony Perkins, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and I want to thank NRB for partnering with us, along with a number of other organizations in this polling that we conducted earlier this month, and just want to commend Dr. Johnson, his leadership here at NRB. And it's very timely. The reason we're releasing this here today at NRB is because of the theme of this year's conference related to religious freedom and religious liberty. As we're seeing literally around the globe today, where Christians are losing their lives because of their faith. And someone say, well, what does that have to do with what's happening in America? It has everything to do with what is happening in America today. As we allow this increase in religious intolerance here at home, persecution grows abroad. And we bring the message to Christians today here in the United States that we have an obligation and a responsibility to exercise our freedoms and our rights, just as the Apostle Paul did, so that religious freedom will continue to be exercised and protected and utilized here in this country. Because as we shrink back because of the fear of conflict here in this country, tyrants abroad will take it to mean that we are no longer interested as a nation in the protection of religious freedom. And so it is vitally important that we exercise that freedom first here at home, and we protect it and promote it abroad. Earlier this month, we conducted a survey of 800 registered voters across the country. Particularly, we wanted to focus in on the issue of marriage, which happens to be at the really critical juncture of conflict when it comes to religious freedom in America today. And the question we asked was this: would you say you agree or disagree with the following statement? I believe marriage should be defined only as a union between one man and one woman. We saw that 53% of Americans agree that marriage should only be defined as a union of a man and a woman. Now, you would say that that's not overwhelming numbers. It's a lot stronger than some of the numbers we see reported today in the media. And you'll notice because of the question, we're very forthright in asking the question, what do you believe marriage should be? 53% say it should be the union of a man and a woman. But I want to draw your attention to the next question we asked, because next month, the Supreme Court will take up the issue of marriage from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And sometime this summer, late June, we'll hand down a decision. Now, this is the question we asked regarding the issue of the Supreme Court. Would you say you agree or disagree with the following statement? States and citizens should remain free to uphold marriage as a union of a man and a woman, and the Supreme Court shouldn't force all 50 states to redefine marriage. 61%, 6 in 10 Americans agree that the states and the citizens should be the ones that define marriage, not the Supreme Court. You see, the court will be at a point of overreach if they impose a one-size-fits-all definition of marriage on the nation by redefining it. In our system of government, where you have the rule of law, major policy decisions are not made until Americans have reached a broad social consensus on issues. And it's clear, based on the polling, that Americans have not reached a broad social consensus that marriage should be redefined. Now, I know this runs counter to the narrative that we hear from those who are advocating the redefinition of marriage, that 37 states now have same-sex marriage. Well, I remind you that only 3 of those states have it because of their own volition. Only 3 in which the citizens have actually voted to redefine marriage. The legislature has done so. The vast majority, it has been the courts imposing, counter to the will of the people, a redefinition of marriage. That is not the method by which we reach broad social consensus. And then finally, I want to draw your attention to one other item in this poll, and I think it's very significant because we see this conflict that is not theoretical, but it's happening in communities, in counties, in states all across this country, where those who are in the business world, whether they be florists, photographers, or bakers like the Kleins who are with us today, they are being told that they must check their faith at the door to the marketplace. And that runs completely counter to our founders' vision that we have the freedom of religion, the freedom to believe. And that freedom to believe is at risk in America today, and more Americans are beginning to see it. And our question we asked would you say you agree or disagree with the following statement? Government should leave people free to their beliefs about marriage as they live their daily lives at work and in the way they run their businesses. This was not even close. 81% of Americans believe we have the freedom to believe, and not just between our two ears, but the freedom to live according to those beliefs in the workplace and in society as a whole. There is a coming conflict that this court will hoist upon America, unlike we've ever seen before, if they redefine marriage and force this on our nation. We don't have to look far back into history to see a parallel example. In 1973, when the court said America would embrace abortion on demand as a national policy, the court said, we'll solve this issue of abortion. 42 years later, they have done anything but solve the issue. Abortion is an issue in every election from president on down. I would suggest you will see the same, if not more, if the court redefines marriage without broad social consensus from the people. That is the highlights. Those are the highlights from our poll. And again, I want to thank NRB for focusing on this issue of religious freedom, which I believe is the most critical area of assault in the culture today. And with that, I turn it back over to Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, Tony. And again, thank you for the partnership with FRC in this research project. We are national religious broadcasters, and one of our mission points is to defend free speech. And I really only want to react to one element of this polling, which I think is striking, and it's the second indicator there, which is, I'll repeat, the overwhelming majority, 81% of Americans agree that government should leave people free to follow their beliefs about marriage as they live their daily lives and work in the way they run their business. This is a press conference, and I want to remind you of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. We are with you on this. We are with the founders on this. We are with the First Amendment on this. The presumption of that First Amendment, or abridging the freedom of speech, it's already there. It's a presumption. It's not that the founders were giving us the freedom of speech. It's already there because of what we read in the Declaration, that we're endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these the right to life and liberty. Liberty is a presumption. Freedom of religion, of speech, of press is a presumption, and that's the way you read the First Amendment, and that's the way I'm thinking about this particular finding, because if you look at polling, 80% is a threshold. It's a slam dunk. And what's even more fascinating is 89% of Hispanics. People are always talking about what is trending and what's happening in America, and people talk about immigration. Well, there's a huge trend. 89%, almost 90% say hands off the way people believe, hands off the way people practice. And then particularly, this one was shocking to me. Those who never attend church still come in at 80%. 80% of those who never come to church would say, government should not compel. Businessmen should not compel. Broadcasters should not compel or interfere with the messaging. So I want to say, NRB is here to defend free speech. And I've said it before, NRB means to become for the First Amendment what the NRA has been for the Second Amendment. And it starts here on this issue of marriage. Government has no right establishing speech codes or business codes on marriage. And actually, 81% of Americans agree entirely. That's my reaction, really, to this poll. Thank you, Tony.
Again, thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you for your partnership and for the interest that NRB has taken in the broader issue of the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion. As I mentioned, one of the areas that we're seeing this conflict in the marketplace is with vendors related to weddings. This is just the first of what will be many, but this is no longer theoretical. It's happening. The Kleins were the owners of Sweet Cakes by Melissa in Oregon. And their story is one of really kind of the American dream of having a vision, a desire. They began this in their home, and because the product was so good and people enjoyed it, it eventually led to a full-time business to where they were working together, employing other people as they made cakes and other bakery items. During the time in which their bakery was operating, Oregon had passed a constitutional amendment in which same-sex marriage was illegal. That was the backdrop to when a couple came into their bakery, a couple that had been there before, or a family that had been there before, which they had serviced, and they would serve anyone. But where they drew the line was on the issue of marriage. Now, they had also been asked previous to this to make a wedding, or not a wedding cake, but a divorce cake, to which they said, we can't do that. That is we see marriage as something as sacred. And so they turned down that business. So they had given some thought to what might happen if someone came in wanting a same-sex wedding cake, to which they politely said, we can't do that. It runs against our understanding of what God created marriage to be, and they politely declined. They became a firestorm erupted around their bakery, and it became ground zero for this battle over religious freedom and the demand for the demand that is coming from homosexual activists that everyone embrace what they're doing. And as a result, they have been involved and continue to be involved in a suit with the Oregon Attorney General, who is pursuing them. Their case has not yet been completely adjudicated, so there are some things they cannot address today, but they have come here today because they understand what's at stake in the marketplace for Christians who simply want to be in the marketplace, providing a good service, a quality service, servicing the community. They have to choose between that and their faith, and they see that as being wrong. So at this time, I would like to introduce Aaron and Melissa Klein.
Good? Okay. That way she wants to say something. All right. So a little correction. The Oregon State Attorney General is not actually coming after us. It is the Bureau of Labor and Industry in the state of Oregon, although the Oregon State Attorney General has weighed in on it on several different occasions through her office. In reference to this polling data that came out, first of all, I think it really shows that the American people are not in line with what the government is doing. I would have to say that the government is actually ignoring what the voters have to say. You know, I really think it has to do with media. The media, not necessarily the media that's in this room today, but the media at large is skewing the opinions of the people and really painting a picture that has nothing to do with the voters have actually stated not only about a year and a half ago, but over and over again in various states and in the federal government. It would almost appear as if we have lost the battle for the culture as Christians. I would say that's not true. I say that we can become relevant. I say that we can fight for our rights. I say that we should fight for our rights. And in a situation such as Melissa and myself, it's painfully evident that it's something we do need to do at this juncture. We're not called to win these battles. We're not called to be victorious. Instead, we're called to put on the full armor of God and stand. When we've done all that we can do, stand. It's obvious, as Tony pointed out, Roe versus Wade was not settled with the courts. Same-sex marriage will not be settled in the hearts of Americans with the courts. And we need to call to action everybody that can to stand up and be a voice in this nation for people like Melissa and myself, because we are not where it ends. It's going to continue. It's going to continue on down the line. Plano, Texas, Houston, Texas are an absolute example of that. We are going to see this agenda forced down the throats of every American in this country at some juncture. I actually believe we have an obligation to the next generation to stand up for our constitutional freedoms, not given by man, but given by God. I believe that we have an obligation to stand up for the rights of our children as they grow up. As Ronald Reagan said, we're never more than one generation away from losing our freedom. And I hold true to that, and I've seen that in my lifetime. And I would just like to applaud all the religious broadcasters in this room for using your First Amendment rights, and I would encourage you to stand for them every day.
You said it perfect.
Thank you, Aaron and Melissa. Thank you for being here today and being a part of this. And apologize, I got some of the details wrong. There's so many of these cases, it's hard to keep them all straight. As I said, these are no longer theoretical, but they're happening in communities across the country where men and women just simply in the marketplace, trying to live and practice their faith, are finding themselves in the middle of what I think may prove to be one of the most tumultuous cultural times in the history of our nation. And I think we're just on the front side of it. This is not limited to bakers and florists and candlestick makers. It goes beyond to almost every walk of life. Craig James, some of you sports fans may recognize that name, a star running back at SMU, on to the professionals, played with the Patriots 7 years in the NFL, and then a very successful career with Fox Sports, in sportscasting, but let me get ahead of myself. For some reason, at some point about a few years ago, 2008, when did you run this? 2012. He decided to enter into politics, a full contact sport, as opposed to football. And he was a Republican candidate for Senate in the state of Texas. A very crowded field that year. Ted Cruz was among those who made that run and succeeded in not only securing the Republican nomination, but became the senator from the state of Texas. But during that campaign, as should happen, constituents asked questions to find out where their potential member of Congress, in this case potential senator, stood on the issues. All of them answered the question regarding what do you believe marriage is? And being in the state of Texas, a state that had a marriage amendment, the answer should not have come as a surprise to anyone that the candidates answered they believed that marriage was the union of a man and a woman as God created it. Well, fast forward 18 months, and Craig James was hired by Fox Sports as a sportscaster, and his tenure there was cut short. It lasted about 24 hours. as they found out that he had made this statement about marriage 18 months prior and declared that that was not appropriate and wouldn't withstand muster within their HR department there at Fox Sports. He is an example of outstanding professionals who are being targeted simply because of their freedom to believe and express those beliefs as marriage being the union of a man and a woman. He is now a part of the Family Research Council and is a speaker in demand across the country as he not only addresses this but other issues. But I've asked Craig to come today and share his view of not only this poll but of his experiences. Craig?
Thank you and good afternoon. Hello, Kleins. I wish Tony's story were fictitious. It's real. For over 20 years, I was a broadcaster, blessed to have covered Super Bowls, Olympics, professional football player, played in Super Bowls, played in the Pro Bowl, did a lot of things that the Lord gave me the talent to do. Did a very illogical thing for someone who'd never run for office. In 2011, decided to run for the U.S. Senate, as Tony said. And I picked a year when they had this guy named Ted Cruz who came in with his cowboy boots and wiped us all out. But during that season of debates, standing right next to Ted, we did answer. And I still, to this day, believe the biblical definition of marriage is between a man and a woman. Fox Sports heard that I was interested in getting back into broadcasting and called and recruited me for a job that I agreed to do. Went on the air, spent 24 hours and was fired the next day because some groups called Fox and said, hey, what about James's answer to his definition of marriage 18 months ago? I was fired, as they have acknowledged to the Dallas Morning News, because, quote, that wouldn't fly in our HR department. I'm going after Fox. And that 81%, I'm not standing here today willing to check my faith at the door. And those 81% who are out there right now who are hearing this or listening to this, you got to stand up and be vocal. In the year that I've been blessed to work with Family Research Council, I've had a chance to support and follow the clients and Mrs. Stutzman and the others who have been wronged. The constitutional amendment for the First Amendment has traditionally been a two-way highway. But right now there's a bulldozer in the name of tolerance that is trampling and trying to close down the lane of religious freedom. It is real. And I know now why I ran for the Senate, because I gave that answer, and I would give it again if I ever ran again. Because the Lord was using me. He's using the clients. He's used Tony Perkins. He's using those of us in this fight for religious liberty and freedom to stand up and be bold. That's the one thing that I would encourage everyone in this room, anyone who is listening or who will read these comments, is to know that we have to be as bold and tenacious as those who are trying to trample and close down the one-way street called religious freedom. If we don't, we will lose it. So I want to encourage anyone, and I have now, over this past year since my firing, have come across countless numbers of men and women who say, man, I'm afraid for my employer to know of my faith. This is the United States of America. And when it comes to a point in time where we're afraid to let someone know about our personal faith, then our country is really, really doomed. Religious liberty is the foundation of our country. So I appreciate Tony, I appreciate the Family Research Council for allowing those of us who have been discriminated against to stand and to do something about it. And again, I will not check my faith at the door. I will knock and I will bang and I will kick and I'll make sure people know that I have a love for my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I will not apologize for that ever. There isn't a job in this country, there isn't an oven in this country that's worth setting aside your faith if you have that faith. And that's why we're here. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I'll just add to it, at lunch today, I had lunch with the former fire chief of Atlanta, Kelvin Cochran, who has a very similar story. If you know his story, he was fired because of his faith. And he has told me, and of course he's filed a federal lawsuit, I think it's reflective. I think, Craig, you're absolutely right. When you look at this 81% of Americans who say we have the freedom to believe, we have the freedom to live our lives according to our faith. It's not just enough to be able to have that in your head. You have to have the freedom to live it. And I do believe that we are going to see more Americans who are now beginning to see the consequences of this redefinition of marriage. Stand up and say enough is enough. And if a fight is what they want, a fight is what they'll get.